The leaves are starting to crinkle, the effigies begin to burn. It's that time of year again, where we celebrate all things spooky and macabre, and how else could I celebrate such a holiday than engaging in the darkest, scariest act I can imagine, being European. Rather, I'm gonna play a PAL horror game that never got a US release. Welcome to PALoween, everybody. On our platter today we've got Michigan, Report from Hell. If you've ever seen this game before, there's a few things about it that probably piqued your interest, namely this guy, or these guys. Anyone who knows anything about Goichi Suda knows that this is not going to be survival horror as we know it. In fact, to call Michigan a survival horror game is akin to saying that somebody engaging in voyeurism is getting some. It's a half-truth. Michigan Report from Hell puts you in the driver's seat of a cameraman working for a news station. An eerie fog has descended upon Chicago, and your employer, ZAKA TV, and consequentially you, are there to get the scoop. You will not be collecting ammo or conserving supplies to fight off the infected creatures that have overtaken Chicago. Rather, you will be filming the news anchor, who will be engaging in most of the action. The anchor walks to where they need to go and waits for your instructions. They shoot their gun where you tell them to.
Get it!
They pick up items and puzzle pieces that you tell them to pick up. It's like a strange hybrid between a point-and-click adventure game and a first-person survival game. So where does the survival portion fit into all of this? While you can die yourself, it's actually pretty hard to do. Most of the enemies you'll meet are focused on your newscaster rather than you or your sound technician that accompanies you. So as the cameraman, your job is to point your newscaster's gun in the right direction and, if need be, Sparta kick them out of harm's way, all while making sure to catch as much of the action on camera as possible. What happens when your newscaster dies? Well, we'll get into that later. I still got some game mechanics that need explaining. The opening movie for Michigan utters these words: "Story changes based on your morality." This is another half-truth. The game has a system in place for 3 separate stats: immorality, suspense, and erotic. The top bar may lead some to believe that suspense and erotic have some sort of tug-of-war mechanic going on, but they don't. You accumulate a specific number of points in either stat based on your actions in the game. Do you want suspense points? Film things happening at shoulder height. Find spooky things around the map and inspect them. Get a thrilling and respectable scoop. Do you want erotic points? Give your glutes the workout of a lifetime and perma-squat, staring up the newscaster's skirt constantly. Find porno mags and other indecent things around the map.
Hey, excuse me?
Now, immorality, that's pretty specific. There are a few things you can do to gain immorality. As you progress through the story, you'll have the opportunity to put down your camera momentarily to help out survivors you find. The immoral thing to do would be to sit there and continue to point your camera at them, recording their gruesome death. Great scoop, bucko, but I don't think Immanuel Kant would approve of your actions. Other ways to gain immorality are to try to film your coworkers showering, Sparta kick your coworkers, and Sparta kick walls, I guess. I consider the statement made by the opening movie a half-truth because it really doesn't change the story. It determines what endings you get, but everything leading up to the ending is exactly the same, and the endings, well, I'll tell you about those in the spoiler section. Your small crew is made up of you, the unnamed cameraman, Jean-Philippe Briscoe, the audio technician and boom operator, and your newscaster. As I mentioned before, you can let your newscaster die. You'd think this would be where the game boots you back to a checkpoint or gives you a game over, but this is not the case. Say you're in level 2. Anne is your newscaster, and for whatever reason you've let those little buggy boys get to her. She dies. You and Briscoe make a judgment call and dip. You run to the next objective off screen and meet with your new newscaster, Carly, in level 4. Were you to keep Anne alive, you'd get to go through level 3 with her. The punishment is not that you have to restart, the punishment is that you have to miss out on a part of the story, part of the scoop. There are 5 separate newscasters in the game, and you can skip a considerable amount of the story should you let them all die. This makes complete sense for a story where you are not the main character, but an observer. In the grand scheme of things, the newscaster doesn't matter. The newscaster is just a vessel for the scoop as far as the cameraman is concerned. One newscaster is just as good as another. While I'm talking about NPCs, now is a good time as ever to talk about voice acting.
Roasting over a campfire.
It seems like the voice talent was handled by a Japanese-based localization middleman named Intac Company Limited. I've heard stories of English voice actors in Japan, and from what I understand, especially during this era, they are few and far between. That is to say, the talent pool might not have been that diverse, and I mean, come on, look at this overlap. To put it bluntly, the English voice acting leaves a lot to be desired. Lines are rushed, sometimes with the emotion of a wet towel.
You unnecessarily put their lives in jeopardy.
Oh my.
When things are meant to be sad or heartfelt, they're funny instead.
Oh my God!
I don't want to consider this a downside though. I don't think this game is trying really hard to be atmospheric or even particularly scary. I think intrigue and playfulness are its strongest points. I mean, there are seriously certain points where there's no sound besides the clip-clopping of your party's footsteps. Michigan's not trying super hard to set a tone. Sometimes the flaccid voice acting even works to the game's favor. As your newscasters die, they keep being replaced with more and more inept newscasters. This means by the third or fourth or fifth newscaster you get, the delivery ends up fitting way better, whether intentionally or not.
Have a look at this, viewers. The man who created the virus that turns people into monsters is turning into a monster himself. Why did this man create such a virus? And why is he allowing it to overpower his own body now?
What better way to convey an inexperienced news anchor who is somewhat camera shy than with a voice actor who doesn't have a feel for the character? I don't generally bring up graphics on this channel too much, but I feel like this does need to be said. While the monster design and character design is pretty alright, the animation and environment is a little In scenes like this where Briscoe is flailing his boom mic around, I kinda just want to look away. Any surface that you look at is going to be super crusty. If you look too close at things, you're going to have a bad time. This is a little bit of a problem in a game where you're expected to camera zoom in on things and examine things all the time. The actual gameplay of Michigan Report from Hell is lackluster to say the least, and I get it, right? That's the point. Suda-sensei wanted you to be a voyeur, not a main character, and that's great and all, but at the end of the day, I'm controlling the character on the screen and doing things, and those things are not really that fun. It's fun to explore and absorb the story and setting, but mechanically speaking, it doesn't do much for me. Even when trying to get a specific ending by trying to get a bunch of erotic or suspense points, the difference between putting my camera up the news anchor's skirt and at them face to face doesn't really do much for me. That said, Michigan is a short game. If you don't end up letting any of your newscasters die and are exploring and checking things out a decent amount, the game will only be about 6 hours. Hell, if you let all your newscasters die, you can beat it in like an hour and a half. The game doesn't outstay its welcome, and because of that, I am willing to overlook its gameplay because it's still interesting conceptually. Now that I've gotten all of that off my chest, it's time to stop skirting around the story. If you want to experience the game without spoilers, it's all you. This is your formal spoiler warning. You can skip to the time code on the screen. Heh, now that those nerds are gone, check out these promotional images that were made for the game. On the real though, Michigan's story feels like it has a lot of parallels with Resident Evil. There's a big virus, ZAKA Group, a company you work for, is responsible for it. The government and military are involved. It's a giant shit show. You'll spend a majority of your playthrough finding these things out. One thing that really interested me in Michigan's story was the increasing hopelessness as you gain new information. Learning that the virus is airborne, then finding out that there's a vaccine, but it only helps people who haven't already been infected and kills those who have been infected. While it's not specifically mentioned by the characters, you've been exposed to these monsters near constantly since you started the game. Putting 2 and 2 together, is getting a hold of the vaccine even worth it if it means you might die violently? Finding out the vaccine is made of common ingredients such as sodium, potassium, and magnesium, and being so desperate that you would inject Monster Energy drink into your veins because it contains those said ingredients? Eventually giving in to hopelessness and finally giving up? This progress is in stark contrast to the hopeful and driven personalities your crew takes on early in the story. There's also the matter of working for the ZAKA group. At first it's just your job, you're going in to get the news. As you realize that ZAKA has been putting all these reporters' lives in jeopardy, and eventually realize that ZAKA was involved in the incident as well, recording the incidents becomes less about reporting the news and more about reporting a great evil to the world, revealing who did this terrible thing so that some justice may be served. By the end of the game, you will be the only survivor. How you carried yourself through the game will determine who your character is. Are you this emotional and driven anime protag who swears he will get revenge on the people who did this? Are you the cold and calculated bearer of bad news? Are you the gross horn dog who was only in it for the smut? It doesn't matter, your fate is the same, but perhaps you were truly immoral, a detestable creature. Maybe you were the mastermind the whole time. You've decimated an entire population, and for what? It's likely that nobody will ever know. Now that is a scoop. Now, in terms of replayability, the game actually has a decent amount of unlockables. You can unlock sexy costumes for all the different characters you party up with, as well as what, you didn't think a game with an erotic meter would have this? Come on. There are also a few collectible VHS tapes that you can find in the game which unlock extra story tidbits for you. However, in the PAL release there is a bug that prevents you from using the theater mode after you beat the game, so you can't even look at those. There's a problem with all these unlockables though conceptually. Unlockable costumes work in a game like Resi 4 because that game is really fun mechanically and is a treat to replay. However, I can't see the same about Michigan. I have a lot of respect for Michigan Report from Hell. It's an interesting game that was trying interesting things. Not many developers would be keen on taking away the main character status from the player like that. In fact, it's cited as one of the reasons why it never got a US release. Not enough meaningful gameplay. Despite its many flaws, I believe that it is short and silly enough to warrant at least a playthrough. The story is interesting enough, and hey, you might enjoy indulging yourself in a little bit of digital voyeurism. Thanks for watching. I'd like to take a moment to personally thank my patrons. Y'all are awesome, and I totally appreciate ya. Reps2GOG also has a Discord server where we discuss riveting topics such as Gex, controller preferences, and more controller preferences. If you'd like to be made aware of releases, you can check out the Discord or my Twitter, whichever strikes your fancy. Thanks for being you, and thanks for watching.